Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Jensen here. Today we're going to take up the second part of our research paper discussion. In this video, we're going to talk about actually writing, getting started with our actual writing of our research paper. Now, in the last video, talked about the preliminary research. How do we gather our sources? Because in my class, there are two general parts of this assignment. The first being a bibliography, where we're just gathering sources, right? So then the second part is the actual research paper. So there are a few steps that are generally considered to be the basis for how most research papers are written. Things like developing a thesis statement. It is generally considered to be easier to write a research paper if you know what it is that you're writing about. Your thesis statement we'll talk about is kind of summarizes the key thing that you're going for. Creating an outline, okay? Not a lot of people don't do outlining. It's a helpful way to structure and put structure into a paper. If we're just writing free form blog kind of stuff, those things generally don't have a lot of structure. But if you're writing a real research paper for a class, structure is important to help your reader go through your writing so that you don't seem like you're on this topic here, on this topic here, on a random topic over here, that it feels more concise and that things flow from beginning, middle to end. And that generally helps for your professors to give you better grades, especially if you're writing about any particular kind of scientific research. There are generally those kinds of elements where there is, some background information, some current state of the art, some future state of things, and then your conclusion. So as we write, there's all kinds of things of how people write. People will do all kinds of writing in different ways. I don't think there's any real right or wrong answer as far as where you begin and write your research paper. We'll talk about how I generally do things just as my own example. And then as you do some revisions, maybe you do revisions, maybe you don't. At least in our university, there are writing centers to where you can consult with people who do writing well and get feedback and have people take a look at your writing, particularly in many places where English is not our first language, right? So I speak English and bad English, okay? So those are my only two languages. And so I understand the difficulty of writing in English. And so for many people who English is not their first language, there are resources generally available to you at your university that are free for you to take advantage of. So I implore people to take advantage of the resources that are available to you. If there is a writing center where there are people who can look at your writing and maybe give you edits, give you suggestions, help you through the writing process, you should take advantage of these. And it is to your benefit to have those kinds of people who are specially focused on writing to help guide you through writing a paper. So second drafts and things like that and revisions, it's good to take advantage of resources at your university or friends and family who are good at those kinds of things to help you do and put a set of fresh eyes on your writing. But we'll talk more about that later. All right, so again, for understanding our topic or understanding our assignment, here's what we're on. Okay, so our first assignment is just gathering information for our bibliography. Okay, so gathering specific kinds of sources. So for generally, my guide is you may not use those sources for writing your paper. You may use them, you may not. There's no hard rule that says you must use any of those, or there's a certain number of how many of them that you're going to use. Again, if you're doing a topic, hopefully you took the first assignment seriously to try and gather the information to make your second assignment easier to do. Okay. Generally, again, I get questions of, well, how many sources should I use for a research paper? Well, again, that depends on what your topic is. For most people, when you're doing some sort of scientific research paper, especially at the freshman level, you got to consider that probably you need a source for every paragraph that you write. Okay. So if you write, let's say on average 2, maybe 3 paragraphs for a page, then you need at least 2 or 3 citations that go with those paragraphs, right? And so if you write a 3 or 4 page paper, you're looking at 6 to 12 sources probably as you write. Okay, so if you've gathered 18 sources, again, maybe a lot of those are not going to be of use, and you're going to have to go back and research. But some of them, hopefully, took some of the sting out of going back and doing some of that research. That you took your first assignment seriously. You gathered real sources that are really going to help you to write your research paper. Okay. So that being said, people obviously will write research papers, and I get any number of numbers of sources that I get. Again, your sources that you use are important. You need to think about the quality of sources that you use. Anytime you write a research paper, you need to think about the quality of sources that you use. Okay, when I have people write about things like medicinal marijuana or marijuana as a drug, something like that, and then they list one of their sources is a website that sells bongs. It's like, okay, that's not a great source that you want to cite in a scientific research paper when clearly they have some bias to what it is they're doing if they're trying to sell you that product as it is. Okay, so scientific journals, peer-reviewed journals are going to be of higher quality for any kind of scientific research paper. Okay, and again, you have access to those through the university. Okay, so inevitably, the first thing that we have to think about beyond just our topic is what kind of paper are you writing? Okay, this drives a lot of the kinds of sources that you're going to pick. This can drive the tone and the direction of your paper. And I get a little bit of all of these. Okay, so there's no right or wrong answer. There are different ways to write any one of these topics. Analytical papers where you're breaking down components of things. So think about, like, if we talk about like polymer technology, okay, maybe you're looking at the current state of polymer technology or a particular aspect like contact lens technology. And maybe you want to look at the future of where that's going. So it may be like you're breaking down, these are the historical components. These are the background underpinnings of the polymer, of various polymer technologies. These are the current state of the art. These are the new upcoming research that is the direction we're going. And so it is a analytical paper that looking at the different components, right? Exposition, again, this is simply explaining. So again, these are in a similar vein of as I said for the polymer paper. Maybe you're simply laying out what is the current state of nanotechnology, right? So it's simply just beginning, middle, and end, a lot of background, current state, here's the direction we're going. So that those same kinds of things, it's how you're wording and how you want to describe and how you're going to organize your paper that kind of is the fine line between those two. Okay, you can have argumentative papers. So obviously, there's not everything in science is clear cut. There are things where we can talk about particular policy areas that are driven based on scientific evidence. Okay, so especially if we're talking about climate change, what kinds of policy areas should we be doing? Okay, there is a clear general scientific consensus in the scientific community about what we should be doing, but that doesn't necessarily translate well into the public sphere. We need to invest in nuclear technology. We need to invest in solar and other technologies. We need to stop using fossil fuels. We need to cut back on coal. So, but those things don't necessarily mean that everyone agrees from the public sphere of how we go about doing that. Okay. So, so papers can have an argumentative or persuasive part of them. Okay. Now, what I would simply advise as you're thinking about these things is to not take the straightforward approach, especially if you're picking a controversial topic. Oftentimes, when we do writing assignments, like we do like our Darwin Day assignment. So usually around Darwin Day, I do an extra credit assignment where people will write about a topic of evolution. But I don't want the cut and dry, this is what evolution is. I don't want the, this is what the argument is that people have with evolution. This is, those kinds of superficial, social issues that we come up with are not really science issues. No one in the science community is arguing about the benefit of evolution or its validity or any of those things. So the tack that I tell is it's not strictly a persuasive argument, but take a fresher approach to it. Why do we need, what is an area where evolution, where something is being impacted by our understanding of evolution? Okay, think about things like whether it's antimicrobial resistance, okay, or some other aspect of how that intersects with climate change, okay, and our future, how we are going to adapt to to the changing environment. Okay, so a different tack. So don't try, if you're going to do something that's like that, try to think of what outside the box of what is a different tack that you're going to take, so that you're not giving the same tired arguments that we see all the time. Okay, we want to be creative. You got to come with new ideas. You got to think outside the box. You got to take a different approach to argumentative papers if that's the direction you're going to go. Okay, just a suggestion. Okay, so once you kind of have the general idea of what kind of paper you're going to do, again, this is mostly driven by your topic that you're choosing. Okay, is we need to think about what is our thesis statement. Now, your thesis statement is important to come up with because it can help, again, drive the tone and the direction of your writing. Okay, if you know what your thesis statement is, which is again is usually talking about what exactly you're going to do. Okay, what are you trying to solve? What are you trying to answer? Okay, so we generally want to be clear, be specific, and it shouldn't ramble. Okay, and we should also avoid the general easy introduction of the point of my paper is this. Okay, you don't want to spoon feed your audience. Okay, the conclusion is then this. Okay, it's like, okay, I shouldn't be reading that this is the conclusion of your paper. Okay, it should naturally flow, and I should see from the language that you're wrapping things up. Okay, same thing with the thesis. The thesis should be directing towards what is the focus of your paper. Okay, what are you trying to get to? Okay, and again, this is driven by, again, the type of paper that you're writing. Okay, and we'll talk about the introduction here and where the thesis kind of should go, but you should have kind of that idea. Now, as you write, your thesis may change. Okay, you may change focus as you are writing. That once you start off writing a paper, that you may find that the thesis is slightly different than what you intended as you started writing. Okay, but putting it down to start with can help as you go forward. Okay, creating an outline. Again, a lot of people don't necessarily do this, but it can be helpful, especially if you're doing longer papers. Okay, so 3 to 4 pages or 1,400 words is not overly long. That an outline is super important. It can help you when you're organizing. Okay, so if you're looking at, your thesis is we ought to invest in nuclear technology in order to deal with the issues of climate change and our future energy independence. If we know that that's where we want to go, okay, there are major points that you want to make. Okay, what kinds of things, what kinds of nuclear technology should we invest in? What are current, social issues? Are there scientific issues that we have to deal with in order to bring those technologies to bear? You know, what kinds of things, as far as education and outreach, do we need to do to convince people or to educate the public about the value of nuclear technology? Okay, there may be dealing with you know you know sub areas of dealing with our past nuclear issues that we no technology is perfect. There are still things that we have to make better or improve upon in our current environment of nuclear technology, and maybe those are sub areas that you have to address. Is how do we deal with superfund sites that we still haven't probably cleaned up, right? And things like that. So there's those kinds of areas can help you to at least organize what should I be going in, what should I be going for. And so when you write a paragraph that's under communication and education, that everything in there is about specifically that topic, and you don't kind of ramble and you're not all over the place. Okay, so again, creating an outline can help you as far as organization, particularly if you're writing a longer paper. Okay, when we get to paragraph and structure in your writing, paragraph structure is, I would say, probably more important for the introduction. Okay, which my first point would be, don't write the introduction first. Okay, save the introduction till later. Okay, if when you write the introduction, usually the introduction has certain components, things like the attention getter or the hook. You want to get your audience hooked in. Why would they want to keep reading, right? The content and focus of your paper. Well, if you haven't, it's easier to write about what is the content and focus of your paper if you've already written the paper, right? And again, your thesis statement may or may not have changed along with the writing of your paper. So your introduction should end with the thesis statement. Again, that's driving. You should think about that. The paragraphs drive towards the next paragraph. So the introduction is very important in that it sets up what the reader is going to do. And especially for things like the content and focus. So in your introduction, if you're going, or if your main outline was things like, current nuclear technology, education and communication, policy changes, and then conclusion, when you write your introduction, you would want to put those things in the order that you wrote them in. So you don't want to write your introduction and then start with the policy implications, communication, and then technology, when that's not how you wrote your paper. If you wrote your paper as communication or current technology, communication, education, and policy issues, then your introduction should reflect the order that you went in. Okay, so it can help to write the introduction later once you have a general structure of how you actually wrote the paper, because by writing the introduction to where you put things in the order in which the paper is, it guides your reader into what they are going to see, and as they see things in the order that they do, okay, that they see things in the prescribed order that you gave it. Okay, so like I said, how you write the rest of it is entirely kind of up to you. I don't necessarily think that paragraph structure is super important for every other paragraph, but at least for the introduction, it can be critical in setting up a research paper if your introduction is done well. Okay, again, many of the other effects or parts of your paper can be more lenient if our introduction is done well. Okay, if you lead your readers into what it is that you're trying to do, here's kind of the structure of how you wrote your paper, but again, it's not in an outline. You're talking about the content of your paper, and then leading off with and then finishing up with your thesis, so that the reader kind of has an idea of where, what are you really trying to get to? Okay, that last sentence is driving home your thesis. What are you trying to get to? And so then that follows up with the conclusion to where that's where what you were trying to get to, and that's where you ended up when you hit the conclusion. Okay. Some things that I find that people forget when we are doing freshman writing, okay, is to cite your source. Okay, so in-text citation, okay, goes with things that we say. Okay, so if you say this is the gold standard for analysis, there should be a source that comes after you saying that. Okay, how do you know that that's the gold source? Where did you get that from? You should cite your source for where that statement comes from. Okay, because again, we can see according to who. Okay, who says it's a gold standard? Okay, it shouldn't be necessarily you probably saying that it's a gold standard, because again, as anonymous or introductory writers, we don't have any qualifications yet probably to say that this is a gold standard. So if you're telling your reader this is a gold standard, it shouldn't be your word that we're going on, right? We should have evidence to back up the things that we say. So if you're saying that it's a gold standard and then your cited source on the gold standard of something like genetics is from a 1980s, research paper, you're a little out of date. Okay, and so maybe that creates red flags that that source is not a great source, that you should be saying that's a gold standard, because maybe it's not anymore, right? Generally, if you are writing, as I said, if you're writing and you write 2 to 3 paragraphs on a page, then you should probably have 2 to 3 sources. And it's okay to cite the same source 3 times. So if you are you had a great article that kind of outlines a lot of the stuff that you want to do, it's okay to cite that more than once, okay? Because again, the content within a paragraph is probably not your own. Again, you're probably synthesizing it from somewhere, okay? We need to work on our synthesis and paraphrasing, okay? And so at the end of that should be the source that you got that information from. Okay. It is also perfectly fine to cite more than once in a paragraph. So if your first sentence is about this gold standard for analysis, that could be a citation. And then maybe you got the rest of the paragraph from another citation, or the next sentence is from another source. And so obviously not every sentence should be cited. You're not citing every sentence. But as you paraphrase and things towards the end, at least, every paragraph should probably have a citation. More like, I would say people tend to err or make errors of less citations rather than more. Okay, I have yet to be faced with someone oversighted where there were too many citations. I have never said you have too many citations, that you need a citation for every sentence in this research paper. Okay, nobody does that much work. Okay, so I'd say people are more likely to not cite enough rather than oversight. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind when we're doing citations is when we get to the end, okay, the end of your most research papers is a works cited page. Okay. It is not a bibliography. Now, the difference between those is that the works cited page are only the references that you used in your paper, that you cited in your paper as you were writing. Okay. The bibliography may include all of the sources that you got. Like in the first part of our assignment, we did a bibliography. We are gathering 18 sources. But in your research paper, I don't want the copy and paste of your bibliography into your research paper. Okay. We're not doing a bibliography. It is a works cited page. So every source should be cited in your paper. And it is very easy to check whether or not you cited a source, because I can pick an author, Control F, and find whether or not that there's only one reference of Joe Smith or of Smith 1978 in your paper. If Joe Smith 1978 is only found in the bibliography, then you didn't, or is only found in the works cited page, then you didn't cite it in your paper. So only the things that you actually use in the writing show up in the works cited page. Okay, and again, these are easy to check, that everything in the works cited page is actually cited in the document, or vice versa, that you cited something and then you actually put the reference in the works cited page. Again, those are common, easy mistakes that people often can slip up on. Okay, and it's oftentimes an easy first thing that I will check, or that many professors will check, is your citations, because that's an easy thing to control find and look around through your document real quick and check to see if you've cited everything right. Okay, because that's a time saver. Of if I can look and I check that Smith 1978 isn't found anywhere in your document, then I already know that you're not off to a good start. That you're already going to have that there's already going to be citation issues as I go through and read your paper. Okay. All right. So let's look at one of the other things that I will generally do is when you do your writing. Now, again, I normally I might have some writing that I was currently doing that I would be able to show you as kind of the process of how we go through things. So we talked about last time of finding some journal articles, and so here would be like a journal article that I was looking at for intent to treat for one of our journal article studies that we're gonna talk about in the class. And so this is generally how I might set up my writing or set up my kind of reference page or resource page, is to get the citation and then to put the in-text. What is the in-text citation going to look like? Okay, so here is the APA citation for this article, and then here is the in-text citation of what it's going to look like. So when I use any information, I already have the in-text citation that I can just copy and paste. Right. And so I'll read through the article, and maybe this is all I found out of the article that was important. So I just copy and paste out of the article. So this way, if I'm coming back to it later, I don't have to reread the whole article. I've already picked out stuff that maybe I thought might be the most pertinent thing that I'm going to come back to. Like here, this is where I'm referencing, okay, randomized controls are the gold standard for study. This source says that this is the gold standard. I'm not saying it's the gold standard. They said it's the gold standard. So that's where I'm going to reference them, that they said it's the gold standard. Now, if you have an issue that that's not the gold standard, it's like, well, okay, but that's what I got. This article says this is recognized as the gold standard. Peer-reviewed article, probably it's from, at least from some medical journal, that if it's not the gold standard, you would have thought someone probably would have called them on it when they were doing the publishing. So, but nonetheless, it is a citation where that is a fact that is stated. Okay, so maybe I'm using this source as my source, and so what I would do is this is just copy and pasted. So this also helps that as I am doing my paraphrasing and things, again, keep in mind that when you are writing, if you take more than 3 or 4 words, it gets into the realm of plagiarism. Okay, so we want to avoid plagiarism issues as you're writing your research paper. We have to be working on synthesis and paraphrasing. Okay, think about what it's saying, think about what you want to say, and then you're trying to avoid just plagiarizing what's written. Again, it's okay to copy and paste and use their words, but quote and cite. Okay. Your papers, also for most papers, you don't want to have large quotations, okay? If there is no other way for you to really say this, and it is something that is specific to the topic that you're writing about, it's perfectly fine to go ahead and quote them, for a sentence, right? Bulk quotations, obviously, according to APA citation and things like that, you have to look at the style guide. How is a bulk quote dealt with, okay? So when I write this, I might write as, randomized control trials are considered the gold standard for scientific or clinical research if we're trying to determine causal relationships, McCoy 2017. Okay, and so that's my paraphrasing that I would have gotten from this article, right? And so then I would just keep going from there. Okay, so this is just one way that I generally tend to do and organize my information. Because again, if you have 18 sources, that's a lot of information. And again, rereading a lot of those can be tedious, especially if you started this in the bibliography. Maybe you started reading articles then, and you don't come back to it for a week or two. It's a good way to save each article in a file, give it a specific name, and then maybe this is, you put the file name in here, like this is, right? So you save the article as intent to treat 1. And then so this is the citation, the intake citation, and the information that you got from that article. And then you would start the next article and you say, maybe the next one is intent to treat 2. And then so this is a separate citation, separate article. This is the information that you got from that other article. And so then you kind of are compiling information as you go. Okay. Again, this is entirely just how I kind of tend to organize and do things. It's not a required way of doing it. There is no right or wrong way of doing this. I don't even know if this is how other people do it. This is how I organize stuff. Okay. So this is just an example of how I do it. All right. So when you're doing your research paper, okay, important things to keep a note of. Number 1, word count. Okay. In most classes, professors go by word count rather than pages. All right. So this means it's unaffected by pictures and diagrams that you put in there. Okay. So if you need to use pictures and diagrams in order to do your paper justice, it's perfectly fine. It doesn't mean that now you've taken, because it doesn't affect the word count. So if you are putting pictures and diagrams in there in order to meet a page length, okay, and it takes up a part of a page and you think you're cutting corners in order to get around that, it doesn't affect the word count. So I still get 3 to 4 pages of actual text, regardless of how many maybe it's 7 or 8 pages long, right? So it's an easy thing to check as the word count, which doesn't include your references. Okay, again, not the reference section, okay, or your works cited section. Okay, making sure that you're following the proper format for in-text citation. That, again, APA format has a reference format. It also has an in-text citation format. So it is not simply McCoy McCoy without a date. Okay, so that's not a proper in-text citation. Okay, so those are easy things that people leave off right off the bat that tend to be red flags, especially when we're looking at grading research papers. The other thing to keep in mind too is that for most academic research, most universities are using things like turnitin.com or some other kind of plagiarism checker. Okay, so we really have to be diligent about our paraphrasing, because it does return a relatively, gives me a percentage of how close it thinks you are to the actual citation. And I can share that. I mean, I've had students who tried to use the same paper for 2 classes, and when it came up 100% plagiarized for another professor, I'm able to reach out to the other professor and be like, hey, can you send me their research paper? Okay. And then I find that, it was, their sister's paper or their brother's paper that was submitted to another class. And they try and tell you, oh, well, they made the mistake, they just uploaded the wrong file, to the other professor. It's like, okay, but they put their name on the paper, not your name. So if it was just a mistaken file upload, then it would have your name on the paper, not your brother or sister's name on the paper. And so they either stole your work. So you're either arguing that they stole your paper and that their professor should therefore give them an F, or you allowed them to have the paper and you committed academic dishonesty, and then you should both fail. So we have to be aware that these checkers are working. They do work efficiently. Okay. And so we have to work on our paraphrasing. We have to work on things like making sure that we're not taking too much, that we're changing the structure, we're putting things in our own words, we're reading, we're synthesizing and rewriting what we have to create a new idea or new paper. Okay. So that's really all I have for the research paper. Again, if you have other questions, you can feel free to reach out to me or leave questions and comments. Otherwise, I will be back with some other videos later.